We want to get to some breaking news right now. Jurors just reached verdicts in the Sean Diddy Combs trial.
That's right. Yesterday, they had reached a verdict on 4 of the charges. They have now reached a verdict on all 5 of the charges. Those are literally coming into us right now. And attorney Joanne Molinaro is back to talk about those charges. Okay, so let's read what we are hearing. I'm following the New York Times updates. There were 5 charges here, 2 for sex trafficking. He was found not guilty on both of those. There were 2 for transportation to engage in prostitution of Cassie and the victim Jane. He was found guilty on both of those, and then not guilty in the racketeering charge. Are you surprised?
No, this is exactly what I predicted just a few minutes ago.
Literally, almost what you said.
Yes, when we heard that there had been a final verdict on count 1. If you recall, when we were talking about RICO, and we've been following this case for weeks now, over several days, RICO requires 2 predicate criminal acts. The reason the prosecution included 2 additional counts, one of sex trafficking and then one of transportation with intent to commit prostitution, was, well, that very conveniently provides the 2 predicate criminal acts.
Right.
The problem was that at least one of these counts the jury had found not guilty, which means they needed to scramble to find that second predicate act. And my guess is they didn't agree on that, and that is why we have a not guilty verdict on that RICO charge.
So let's focus on those prostitution charges. What did they have to prove there, and how serious are these charges?
Well, these are very serious charges.
Okay.
And remember, it's not just that they engaged in prostitution, but that they transported. And this goes towards the interstate commerce component, which is a very technical component of the RICO charge, but it wasn't enough to save the RICO charge for that prosecuting team. It is a serious count. It's, faces up to 10 years in prison, and we have 2 guilty counts here. So Sean Combs can stand, it will probably be facing a significant time in prison depending on how that sentencing goes.
Oh, well, he did face up to life in prison. So this is very shocking news. Sean Combs, we understand, pumped his right fist when he heard the verdict. Your take on this?
My take on that is he has a right to feel a little bit vindicated here. The defense has always maintained that, number one, there certainly was no criminal enterprise, much less a conspiracy to engage in a criminal enterprise. And the other big story here from the defense's perspective was that these women engaged in these acts of their own volition with their consent. And so that is the story that the defense has mounted from the very beginning. They took a huge gamble, as we talked about last week, by bringing no witnesses as part of their defense, and it appears that much of that gamble has now paid off.
Yeah, these RICO charges are very serious, of course, and it seems like the burden of proof was very high.
Well, the burden of proof in any criminal case is always going to be high, beyond a reasonable doubt. And it seems here there was plenty of doubt when it came to figuring out, was there really a criminal enterprise here? Was there a second person who intentionally participated in that conspiracy? It looks like because the jury found that there was no sex trafficking involved here, they simply couldn't come to an agreement on whether or not RICO, or in fact, they did come to an agreement and they agreed that there was no RICO count here.
Yeah, and of course we saw that huge civil lawsuit from Cassie, and then the video that came out that was used in this trial, which set off, I feel like, this big spate of legal battles for Sean Combs. Does this feel like this ends now?
Well, I think, first of all, there are appeals that may or may not happen, right? And we saw that there have been other lawsuits kind of coming out of the woodwork, perhaps, incited by the fact that this whole case has been going on. Now, the fact that he has been found not guilty on the 2 most serious counts, right? What does that mean for additional lawsuits that may come out of the woodwork? We really don't know. Well, there may be other criminal charges that come out of the civil litigation that we're sort of seeing play out in the news. It's a little bit too early to tell, but I think the fist pump by Sean Combs says a lot. I mean, he believes, and his defense team believes, they have scored a major victory, not just in this case, but for the tenor of things to come.
Absolutely. Also, can you talk about the murkiness? Okay, you're found guilty. He's found guilty on both counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, but not on sex trafficking. I think to the general public, that feels a little bit confusing.
It does feel confusing. And I think that part of it is, what was the intention? What was the state of mind of the women, of the supposed victims, right? Because prostitution, I don't think necessarily entails the coercion, right? The being forced against one's will.
Okay.
And like I said, again, from the very beginning, that has been the drum that the defense team has been beating, which is that these women engaged in these sex acts, these freak-offs, with their consent, with their knowledge. And, you know, there's sort of a component of that coercion that is required for sex trafficking that the jurors may not have felt was as necessary for the prostitution counts.
Yeah. Joanne, considering he was convicted or not convicted of the most serious charges, for those he was convicted on, what again does he face in terms of a possible sentence?
Well, so the maximum sentence for the 2 counts of transportation with the intent of prostitution is 10 years, okay? And there were 2 counts of that.
Okay.
So it's very possible, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I don't think that there's a requirement that those sentences be concurrent. They can be, you know, stacked on top of each other. So, I mean, there's potentially 20 years on the table. Is it likely that the prosecution is going to seek the full sentence? Maybe. But, you know, he may face quite a bit less than that, depending on how the sentencing hearing plays out. He may face up to 20 years in jail.
But you said you totally expect the defense to appeal. How long does the appeal process last?
Well, there's usually a deadline for the defense to file an appeal, and that's a very short deadline.
Okay.
I can't see any reason that they would try and delay that. The appeals process after that can last decades.
Wow.
I mean, because there's appeal after appeal after appeal. So the appeals process can be long and arduous, but my expectation is that they will appeal this immediately, get that thing on file, and then there might be some negotiations that occur with regards to continued plea bargaining in order to mitigate a potential sentence. But given what we've seen of this defense team, their willingness to make power plays, to take massive gambles, you know, my guess is they're going to appeal and they're going to go for the smallest possible sentence, or they're going to say, we don't think we should have had guilty verdicts on even these 2 counts.
Speaking of that defense team, they are just asking that Combs be released now that he is not facing the more serious charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy for racketeering. They're now saying, well, he should be released from jail until he's sentenced on the transportation for prostitution charges.
Again, that's right in line with the defense's playbook, you know, that we've seen throughout this trial. And I do think that it's not an unreasonable request at this time. We'll see what the judge thinks about that. But like I said, again, that fist pump says a lot. He knows that his future, the trajectory of his future, has appreciably changed.
So it's up to the judge's discretion whether he remains behind bars or can be released. Whatever his sentence ends up being, he has already been behind bars for several months. Will he get credit for time served?
Absolutely. That time served will be a credit to whatever sentence, like you said, that he ultimately receives.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we just got this verdict in. If you're just joining us, he was found guilty on those 2 charges of transportation to engage in prostitution, but not on the 2 sex trafficking counts and not on the racketeering count. Can we go back to the jury that made this verdict? We talked about when they were first put together, who was on that jury. 8 men, 4 women from New York. Some said they were fans of hip hop. Others were not. Ages ranging, I think, from 30 all the way to 75. Tell us how you think the makeup of the jury played into what they heard and saw in the courtroom these past few weeks.
I think, you know, that what happened here, again, is that there were some people who very much empathized with and believed the women who said that they were coerced, that they were forced into these freak-offs against their will, whether it was through threat of violence, blackmailing, whether there was bribery involved. I believe that there are some on this jury who truly believed those women. But I think that there were many on this jury who was not convinced that these women, in fact, were forced into these acts. We saw hundreds of text messages from some of these women saying, I love you, I still want to be with you, I want to do these things. And in the end, I think that was simply too much for some of these jurors. And ultimately, they persuaded those who may have hung on the fence a little bit about this issue that they did, in fact, engage in these with consent, and therefore there could not be a sex trafficking charge and certainly could not be a racketeering verdict.
We are also getting another update from the defense. Watching what the New York Times is tweeting about from the courtroom today. They're saying that the defense is suggesting a $1 million bond, and they're really pushing for Combs to be able to walk out of the courthouse today. How likely is it that the judge now agrees to say, okay, here's his bond, and he can go until he's sentenced?
That's very, very tricky. I mean, and this is a newer judge, so we don't have, at least much of a track record on these issues. It really could go both ways. Again, my gut instinct here, which actually has served me quite well.
No, you guys are track record today.
My gut instinct is that the judge is going to be inclined to let him go.
What factors are considered there?
The biggest factor in any of these things is whether he's a flight risk,
right.
And he has been, for lack of a better way of saying it, he's been a pretty courteous defendant in this case. He hasn't been obstructive. He got a little bit of criticism for nodding too, vigorously during some of the testimony. But beyond that, he's been sort of a model defendant. And I'm not, talking about what he actually did or what he's been charged with. I'm just talking about his behavior throughout this trial. He has come, his family has been there. He's been sort of a model defendant. And I think that will come into play. And of course, the defendants, the defense counsel is right. The gravity of the counts that he was in fact found guilty of is much less than a RICO or a sex trafficking claim. And as a result of that, my guess is that the judge may be inclined to let him go, especially because he's been in jail for, a while
Several months,
now.
Well, given all of that, if the judge does decide to let him go, let him be free, would he have to wear an ankle monitor?
He may not. He may be required to stay at home. Whether or not he wears an ankle monitor, his movements may be restricted to within the state, which can be a little bit frustrating for somebody who's been in jail for several months now and, does have a business that probably requires him to travel across state boundaries. But, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we are taking a live look outside of the courthouse in Manhattan. There will be a press conference, of course. Joanne Molinaro, we thank you so much for being with us for the weeks of this trial and giving us context. Again, Sean Combs found guilty there on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and not guilty of the 2 sex trafficking charges or racketeering charge this morning. We will continue to follow this as the defense is pushing for him to be released now. Joanne, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.